Hello, welcome to Straight Painting. I'm your host Zach, and I'm officially inviting you on my journey of learning to paint using Magic the Gathering cards. Together, let's learn from my mistakes. Alright, on this week's episode, we're going to try to make a borderless Evolving Wilds. I've specifically chosen this card so it can go into my Omnath Locus of Rage deck, where it'll help me make some sweet 5/5 elementals. If you're ready, join me down on the workstation and we'll get started. Welcome back to the workstation. Before we begin today's altar, let's just do a quick recap to make sure we have everything we need at our workstation here. So first off, we've got a piece of computer paper underneath our card, which will make cleanup a lot easier, and it will also act as a little bit of a mixing palette while we create the colors that we need for this card. We've got some paper towel off to the side, which we're going to dry our brushes off on. We have some water just off camera here, and we also have our palette ready to put the paint onto. I ended up getting some new brushes. I wanted some finer tips, so I ended up going to Michael's here and picking these up over the past couple days. So I'm excited to try these out. So we've got our brushes, our selection of those. We have our marker, which we're going to use to darken the edges to create a little bit of a base for the paint to adhere to. We have our toothpick, which will allow us to clean up any of the edges after we're done. And we've got our selection of paints. So for this one, we're always going to use the same three colors for the most part. We've got titanium white, we have burnt sienna, and we have black. In addition, because Evolving Wilds has a bit of a bluish and greenish tone, I have included a dark green, and I've included ultramarine blue. Both of these we can lighten up using the white paint, so I'm not too worried about matching with that. With all our supplies set up, let's get ready to paint. All right, here we are with the finished product. Quick recap about how I feel about it. As my second card, I'm happy with continuing to try to improve my painting as I go along, and I'm happy that I got the smaller size brushes. I think those worked out a lot better than the larger size brushes that I had the first time. Other things that I'm happy about with this card are the edging work for the tree trunks here. Now that's, again, pretty easy to like. These are plain black tree trunks for the most part, so that's very easy to blend in. I'm also happy with sort of this atmospheric shade that I was able to come up with for the sky parts of the card. I think that worked out rather well, and the transition for the shadowing on the actual card itself as it moves up the frame, I'm somewhat happy with. Things that I'm going to need to improve on, that I'm learning, continuing to learn in my second attempt here. Number one is I tend to make my colors too bright when I mix them, and that makes these sections look a little odd on the card itself. So one way that I'm going to try to combat that in future is I'm going to make sure that I sit down and use smaller amounts of paint when I'm actually mixing it together. And the second thing that I'm learning is I tend to leave too much paint on the brush itself before I apply it to the card. So I'm going to have to remember to remove some of that excess on the computer paper before I go to apply it, because it tends to leave too thick of a layer. And as you could see as I was painting it, once you put too much paint down on the card itself, it makes it harder to maneuver around on the card itself to get the desired effect that you want. For example, with these, leaf texture that I was trying to do where I was dabbing the brush on it, a smaller amount of paint, I believe, would create a better effect overall. So those are my two takeaways. Use darker colors, stop mixing things so brightly, and keep less paint on the brush when I go to apply it to the card surface itself. The last takeaway that I have is to keep in mind the effort you put in is more important than the perfection you achieve. That's really just a wordy way of saying the more you try, the better you'll get, so don't be afraid to try. I want to thank you for joining me on this week's episode. I've continued to learn things in this entire process. I hope that you're continuing to learn something as well. I'm now ready to put this card into my Omnath deck and start creating some elementals. And I hope that you are ready to join me again in 2 weeks' time when we'll try a different card project. Until then, peace.